The county clerk looked at me like I'd asked her to find a ghost in the filing system. She'd pulled every document from my grandmother's house on Route 134, just outside Jefferson, Texas. Property surveys, building permits, tax assessments spanning over a century. The main structure was there in exhaustive detail. Built 1889, renovated 1924, minor repairs 1967. But the annex wasn't there, not in a single record. According to these files, she said, sliding the stack across the counter, that building doesn't exist. I looked down at the photograph in my hand, the one I'd taken 3 days ago and printed because I needed something physical to show her. The annex stood there, solid and real, connected to the main house by a covered walkway, weathered clapboard, dark green shutters, a door that wouldn't open. She was still waiting for me to accept what her files were telling her, but I'd stood in front of that door. I'd touched it. My grandmother died on a Tuesday in March, and I inherited the house I'd never been allowed to enter. That alone should have told me something. But grief makes you stupid, makes you accept mysteries as quirks instead of warnings. She'd raised me in Houston after my mother disappeared when I was 2 years old. Disappeared without explanation, without goodbye, without leaving anything behind except a few photographs and a silence my grandmother refused to break. For 28 years, she'd been the only family I knew. She'd worked as a librarian, lived in a small apartment near Herman Park, kept a neat and ordered life, but she'd never taken me to Jefferson, never mentioned the property except once, when I was 12. I'd asked why we never visited the place she'd grown up. She'd looked at me with those steady gray eyes and said, "When I'm gone, that house is yours, but you won't understand it until you go there yourself." I thought she meant I wouldn't understand the value of it, or the weight of memories. I was wrong. The house sat 7 miles outside Jefferson, Texas, where Highway 134 narrowed, and the pine trees grew dense enough to make afternoon feel like dusk. The nearest neighbor was 3 miles east. The road turned to gravel a mile before the property, then to dirt. My grandmother had paid the taxes faithfully for 63 years, but hadn't lived there since 1961. I arrived on a Thursday afternoon in late March, with a single suitcase and legal documents. The house was exactly as the photographs showed. 2 stories, white clapboard, dark shutters, wide porch. Except for one thing. In every photo my grandmother had kept, the annex wasn't visible. The camera angle always cut it off, or the light was wrong, or a tree was positioned just so. But when I stood in the driveway, it was right there. Before we continue, subscribe if you want to keep hearing stories like this. Stories these houses were never meant to tell. The main house opened easily. I'd expected rust-frozen locks, but the key turned smoothly. So smoothly I wondered if someone had oiled it recently. The door swung inward without a sound. The air inside wasn't musty. It should have been. Windows closed for decades, Texas heat, accumulated stillness. Instead, it smelled like lavender and old paper, the way my grandmother's apartment in Houston had smelled, as if someone had been maintaining it, as if the house had been waiting. I set my suitcase down in the entry hall and listened. Old houses have sounds, settling boards, wind through gaps, pipes adjusting. This house was silent, not quiet, silent, the kind of silence that feels like held breath. The entry hall was narrow, with wallpaper from the 1940s, pale yellow with climbing roses. The floor was hardwood, dark with age, polished to a soft gleam. A mirror hung on one wall, its glass slightly silvered but uncracked, reflecting my tired face back at me. The parlor's furniture was covered in white sheets. Underneath, everything was pristine. A burgundy sofa showing no wear, a carved coffee table, 2 armchairs, a bookshelf filled with books. Austen, Dickens, poetry collections. No dust. I checked the undersides of the sheets. Clean, bright white, no yellowing. They smelled freshly laundered. I walked through the downstairs, cataloging impossibilities. The dining room had a table set for 6 with unchipped china. Crystal glasses caught afternoon light and scattered rainbows across the walls. In the hallway, a rotary telephone sat waiting. The kitchen was at the back. Avocado green appliances from the 1960s. Formica counter with gold starbursts. Small breakfast table with chrome legs and yellow vinyl chairs. Linoleum floor printed with daisies. Everything clean. Everything perfect. I turned the faucet. Water came immediately. Clear, cold, strong. No sputtering. No rust from pipes that should have been empty for years. I let it run over my fingers. It was cold enough to hurt. I tried the stove. The burners clicked and lit, blue flames appearing instantly. I turned them off quickly, unsettled by how ready everything was. Someone had been maintaining this, or the house had maintained itself. Upstairs, 3 bedrooms. The first had clearly been my grandmother's. A vanity with an old mirror, an iron bed frame, a wardrobe with dresses from the 1950s. I touched one. The fabric wasn't brittle, just old. In the vanity drawer, a hairbrush with dark strands still caught in the bristles. They looked fresh. The second bedroom was smaller, painted pale yellow, a child's room, small bed, shelf with books, Little Women, Anne of Green Gables, Nancy Drew mysteries with cracked spines. On the nightstand, a glass of water sat next to a reading lamp. The water was fresh, condensation on the outside of the glass. I picked it up, cold, as if someone had filled it this morning, as if someone had been reading in this bed, set down their glass, walked away, and would return any moment. I backed out of the room. The third bedroom was empty except for a single chair facing the window. When I looked out, I could see the annex clearly. The covered walkway perfectly framed, the green door visible at the end. Someone had sat in this chair and watched that door, for hours, maybe years. I went back downstairs and found myself at the door that led to the covered walkway. It was in the kitchen, next to the pantry, a simple wooden door with a brass knob matching the one on the annex. The knob turned easily. The door opened onto a small landing, 3 wooden steps down to the covered walkway. The walkway was about 20 feet long, open on the sides, with a slanted tin roof patinated with rust and green. The floor was wide planks painted gray, though most of the paint had worn away. I stepped down and walked slowly toward the annex. My footsteps echoed despite the open sides. The sound seemed to move ahead of me, announcing my arrival. The annex door was dark green. The brass handle looked original, tarnished but solid. There was no visible keyhole, no lock mechanism, just a handle and a frame that fit so tightly I couldn't see any gap. I tried the handle. It didn't turn. I pulled, pushed, put my shoulder against it. Nothing. The door didn't budge even a fraction. I knelt and looked at the threshold. No gap there either. The door fit perfectly, impossibly perfectly, as if sealed rather than built. I stood and knocked. The sound was dull, as if the wood were thicker than it should be, or something directly behind absorbed the sound. No echo, no hollow resonance, just a flat, dead sound going nowhere. I pressed my ear against the door and listened. At first, nothing. Then faint. So faint I thought I imagined it. A sound like breathing, not human breathing. Something slower, deeper, the kind of breath a sleeping animal takes. I stepped back and looked up at the windows. 3 of them, evenly spaced, shutters closed, painted dark green. No light between the slats, no movement, but I had the distinct feeling something inside was looking back. I walked around to the side of the annex. No windows, just solid clapboard, weathered and old. I continued around back. Still no windows, no door, just a blank wall. When I pressed my hand against the clapboard, I felt something strange. Warmth, not from sunlight. The sun was on the other side. Something else, something internal, as if there were a heat source inside, as if something living was pressed against the wall from the other side, matching my palm. I pulled back and walked quickly to the front, across the walkway, back into the main house. I closed the door and locked it, though I didn't know what I was locking out. That night, I found the journal. It was in the bottom drawer of my grandmother's desk in the study, underneath old bills and receipts. A thin notebook with a leather cover, worn smooth in places as if handled often. The first entry was dated September 1959. The house is teaching me to be still. That's the only word for it. Teaching. Not forcing, not demanding, just waiting until I understand. Mama says this is how it's always been. The house doesn't explain itself. It shows you, and you learn or you leave. I turn to the next page. Mama says the annex has always been there. But when I look at old photographs, I can never find it. The eye slides away. That's how she described it. The eye slides away, like trying to look directly at something in peripheral vision, as if the camera doesn't want to see it, as if seeing it requires something more than looking. Several pages later, I asked Mama what's inside. She said, "The things we agreed to keep." When I asked what that meant, she looked at me with those steady eyes, the ones I see in the mirror now, and said, "You'll know when you need to know, but knowing and understanding aren't the same thing." The entries continued through 1960. increasingly fragmented. I dreamed about her again. The girl. She's always in the same place, wearing the same dress. She doesn't speak, just watches, waiting. Mama says it's just the house settling into my mind, making space for itself. 3 months now. I'm starting to forget what Houston looks like. Starting to forget the sound of traffic, crowds, strangers. The silence here is becoming my language. Mama left for town today. Won't be back until Thursday. She says I'm ready. I don't feel ready, but the house is patient. The journal entries stopped in 1961. The last page had one sentence. I'm leaving today. The house will remember me. I sat at the desk for a long time, trying to make sense of it. The obvious answer was trauma. Something had happened here. Something my grandmother couldn't process. The journal documented her psychological crisis. The references to the house, teaching, her, settling into her mind. These were the words of someone experiencing a break from reality. The annex had become a symbol of whatever she was running from. That's why she'd left. That's why she'd never come back. That's why she'd kept the property but couldn't visit, couldn't even photograph it directly. It made sense. It was rational. It let me sleep that first night, though I kept the bedroom door locked and a chair propped against it. I woke to find the walkway door open. Sunlight was streaming through it directly onto my face. I'd fallen asleep on the parlor sofa, too unsettled to go upstairs. The light hitting my eyes woke me. I sat up, disoriented, and looked toward the kitchen. The door stood wide open, early morning sun pouring through, illuminating the walkway beyond. I know I'd closed it. I specifically remember checking it twice, testing the latch, making sure it was secure. I'd even locked it, turning the small brass lock set into the knob. But now it was open, and the lock was still turned, still in the locked position. I walked to the doorway slowly, my heart hammering. The walkway was empty. The annex door was still closed, but there were footprints on the wooden planks. Small footprints, child-sized, the kind a 7 or 8-year-old might make. They led from the annex door toward the main house, then stopped halfway across, just stopped, as if whoever made them had been walking, and then suddenly ceased to exist mid-step. I stepped onto the walkway carefully, avoiding the prints. They were made in dust, though there hadn't been dust yesterday. I would have noticed. When I reached where they stopped, I knelt down. The dust was disturbed in a strange pattern, not scattered, not brushed away, just ended, as if the feet making the prints had been there one moment, and then simply weren't. I looked up at the annex door, still closed, still showing no keyhole, no lock, but I could feel something watching me, not seeing me, feeling me. Aware of my presence the way you're aware of someone standing behind you even when you can't see them. I went back inside and called the Jefferson Historical Society. The number was on a tourist brochure I'd picked up at a gas station. A woman named Mrs. Parsons answered, her voice warm and patient. I'm trying to find information about a house on Route 134, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. Built in 1889. I inherited it from my grandmother. Oh yes, Mrs. Parsons said immediately. The Whitmore place. Your grandmother was Clara Whitmore, wasn't she? I felt something cold move through my chest. My grandmother's married name was Sullivan. She'd never mentioned a name like Whitmore. I'd never seen it on any document, any piece of mail. Yes, I said carefully. Such a shame she never came back. Mrs. Parsons continued. That house has been in the Whitmore family for 5 generations. Beautiful property. Though folks around here, she paused. Well, folks around here have always said it's a private kind of place. What does that mean? Another pause. I could hear a clock ticking in the background. It means people who live there tend to keep to themselves. Always have. The Whitmores were respected. Don't get me wrong. Good people. They paid their bills, helped neighbors when needed. But they didn't mingle. Kept their business their own. Nothing wrong with that. Just a family that values their privacy. Do you know anything about an annex? I asked. A smaller building connected to the main house. The silence stretched so long I thought the call had dropped. Mrs. Parsons? I'm sorry, honey, she said finally, and her voice had changed. Cooler, more distant. I don't think I can help you with that. But you should talk to your family, she said. Some things are meant to stay within the family. She hung up. I stood in the kitchen, phone still pressed to my ear, listening to the dial tone. Then I walked back to the study and read through the journal again, looking for anything I'd missed. On one of the middle pages, I found a sentence I'd skipped. Mama says all families have arrangements. Ours is just more honest about it. I told myself it was metaphorical, a way of describing family obligations, unspoken agreements binding generations together. My grandmother had been young, isolated, probably dealing with her mother's death. The journal was evidence of stress, her attempt to make sense of a difficult situation. The annex was probably a storage building, something the family had used but never documented. Rural people often built without permits. That's why it wasn't in county files. And the footprints. I'd been tired, stressed, grieving. I'd probably made them myself without realizing it. Or they'd been there all along, and I hadn't noticed in fading light. It was all explainable, rational. But that night, I couldn't stay in the house. I drove to Jefferson and got a room at the old Mulberry Inn. I told the owner I was settling my grandmother's estate, needed a comfortable place while I sorted through things. She was sympathetic. She gave me a room with a view of the Cypress Bayou and didn't ask questions. I slept poorly, dreaming of footprints ending in midair, of doors opening themselves, of something watching through gaps I couldn't see. The next morning, I drove to the county clerk's office again. I needed to see those records one more time, needed to prove the annex wasn't documented. A different clerk was working, younger, maybe 25, with a name tag that said Jennifer. I asked for the property records for Route 134, specifically the original survey from 1889. She pulled out a rolled architectural drawing, yellowed with age but still legible. She spread it on the counter, and I leaned over it, tracing the lines with my finger. There was the main house, drawn in careful detail with measurements and notations. The garage location marked, to be constructed. The well, clearly indicated. The property boundaries extending 20 acres back into pine forest. And in the back, connected by a covered walkway, the annex. My breath caught. "Wait," I said. "This shows the annex." Jennifer frowned. "What annex?" I pointed. "Right here. This building." She looked where I was pointing. Her frown deepened. "Ma'am, that's the cistern house. For water storage. It's marked right here, see? Cistern." I looked again. The label was there, handwritten in faded brown ink. But the building it referred to was exactly where the annex stood. Same size, same dimensions, same connection to the main house. "But I'm looking at a building in that exact location," I said, trying to keep my voice level. "And it's not a cistern." Jennifer pulled out another document, a property assessment from 1967. "Look here. The cistern house was demolished in 1965. Your grandmother paid for the demolition herself, had it removed because it was structurally unsound. She showed me the receipt. It was real, official, bearing the county seal, signed by Clara Whitmore, dated June 12, 1965. A payment of $340 to Henderson Construction for demolition of cistern structure and removal of debris. But I had walked across that covered walkway 2 days ago. I had touched that door. I had seen those footprints. "Can I get a copy of this?" I asked. "Of course." Jennifer made a photocopy and handed it to me. I drove back to the house, the copy folded in my jacket pocket. When I pulled into the driveway, I sat for a long moment, just staring at the annex. Solid, real, undeniably present. Then I got out and walked around to the back of the building. I'd been here yesterday, but I looked more carefully now. The clapboard was weathered in a specific pattern. The boards at the bottom were more worn than those at the top, suggesting water damage, exposure to rain splash. The pattern you'd expect from a building that had stood for over a century. But at the corners, where the boards met, there was something odd. The nails were new, not rusted, not painted over, just clean metal driven into old wood. I walked around to the front and examined the covered walkway more closely. The posts supporting the roof showed the same thing. Old wood, new nails, as if the structure had been taken apart and reassembled, or as if it was rebuilding itself. I went back to the main house and found a toolbox in the garage. I selected a hammer and a pry bar and returned to the annex. I was going to open that door, one way or another. I wedged the pry bar into the gap between door and frame, or where a gap should have been. The bar wouldn't fit. There was no space. The door sat flush against the jamb as if sealed. I tried the hinges instead. They were on the outside, old-fashioned strap hinges with decorative finials. I positioned the pry bar under one and pulled. The hinge didn't budge. I put my weight into it, levering against the frame. The wood of the frame started to crack. The hinge stayed solid. I tried the second hinge. Same result. The wood around it began to splinter, but the hinge itself was immovable, as if welded in place. I stepped back, breathing hard, and looked at the door again. Then I swung the hammer against it, aiming for the center panel. The hammer bounced off. It didn't sink in. It didn't crack the wood. It just bounced, the way a hammer would bounce off steel or stone. My arm rang with the impact. I tried again, harder. Same result. The door absorbed the blow and gave nothing back. I dropped the hammer and pry bar and sat down on the walkway, my back against the main house. The annex sat there in front of me, waiting, patient. That's when I noticed the writing. It was carved into one of the walkway posts, low down, near the floor. Letters so small I'd missed them before. I had to turn my head and read them from an angle. She stayed here so I could leave. The handwriting looked like a child's. I got up and examined the other posts. On the second one, more writing, 1897, 1961. On the third, Whitmore keeps its promises. I went back to the main house, my hands shaking, and pulled out the journal again. I read through it more carefully, paying attention to dates, to names, to anything that might explain what Whitmore keeps its promises meant. And then I found it, written on a page I'd thought was blank. The writing was so light I'd missed it, but when I held the page up to the window, letting sunlight through, I could see it. Mama says all families have arrangements. Ours is just more honest about it. One stays, the rest go free. It's been like this since Margaret. It will be like this after me. The house keeps us. We keep the house. And the annex. The annex is where the keeping happens. Margaret, 1897. I went to the basement. I hadn't explored it yet. Hadn't needed to. But now I needed to know what was down there. The basement stairs were steep and narrow. At the bottom was a single room, stone-walled, with a dirt floor, empty except for a trunk in the center. A trunk that hadn't been there yesterday. I was certain. I'd looked down these stairs, seen the empty space, but now there was a trunk. Old, brass-bound, sitting in the exact center of the floor as if placed there for me to find. I opened it. Inside were photographs, hundreds of them, loose and in albums, spanning what looked like over a century. Some were in protective sleeves, carefully preserved. Others were loose, edges curled and yellowed. I lifted them out carefully, spreading them on the dirt floor in rough chronological order. The earliest ones were formal portraits, the kind taken in studios when photography was new and required sitting perfectly still for long exposures. A family of 7 standing stiff and unsmiling in front of a painted backdrop depicting a garden that had never existed. A woman in a high-collared dress with jet buttons, hands folded in her lap, expression severe. A man with a beard and a watch chain across his vest, one hand resting on his wife's shoulder in the formal pose that meant ownership as much as affection. 5 children arranged by height, the oldest maybe 15, the youngest, a girl with dark hair, no more than 6 or 7. Written on the back in faded brown ink that had bled slightly into the paper. Whitmore family, 1895, Jefferson, Texas. William, Martha, Charles, Elizabeth, Robert, Anne, Margaret, the youngest. I set that photograph aside and continued. More portraits from the same era, the children growing older in incremental years. Charles at his wedding, standing stiff beside a woman in white. Elizabeth holding a baby wrapped in elaborate christening lace. Robert in a military uniform, looking impossibly young. Anne seated at a piano, her expression dreamy, her hands frozen above the keys. But Margaret never appeared older than 8. Every photograph that included her showed the same serious child, the same dark hair pulled back with a ribbon, the same expression of patient waiting. I found more. The same family in different configurations, different years. The parents aging, the siblings maturing, marrying, having children of their own. But Margaret stayed 8 years old. Then I found a photograph that made me stop breathing. It was dated 1897. It showed a young girl, maybe 8 years old, standing alone in front of a building I recognized immediately, the annex. But in this photograph, the annex looked different, newer. The paint wasn't faded. The shutters were straight. The door was open, and the darkness inside was absolute, a blackness that seemed to absorb light, rather than simply lacking it. The girl was wearing a white dress with lace at the collar and cuffs. She wasn't smiling. She wasn't crying. She was just waiting. Her hands were folded in front of her. Her expression was calm, accepting. On the back of the photograph, in the same handwriting I'd seen on other images, Margaret, the first. She stays so we can go. I set the photograph down carefully and continued through the trunk. More photographs, more generations, the pattern becoming clear. In the 1920s, a photograph of the house with a family of 6 standing in front. One person, a young woman with bobbed hair and a dropped waist dress, standing near the annex, separate, apart, her expression resigned. Written on the back, The Watcher, 1923-1959. In the 1940s, another photograph, another family, another person standing near the annex. A teenage boy this time, gangly and uncomfortable in a suit too large for him. Written on the back, The Keeper, 1942-1943. Only 1 year. I wondered what had happened to him. In the 1960s, my grandmother, 23 years old, standing in front of the annex door with an expression I'd never seen on her face in the photographs I'd grown up with. Not happy, not sad, just resigned, accepting what she couldn't change. Written on the back, The Guardian, 1959-1961. Every photograph showed the same pattern. A family, a house, one person separate from the others, always positioned near the annex, always with that same expression of resignation. But there was one photograph that didn't fit. It was newer than the others, taken on instant film, Polaroid, the white border distinctive, dated 1987. It showed a woman I didn't recognize at first. Too young, too vibrant. But when I looked closer, I saw features I knew. My mother's nose, my mother's mouth, my mother's eyes. She was holding a small child. Both of them were standing in front of the main house. Not the annex, the main house. Both smiling. Both looked happy. On the back, in handwriting I recognized as my grandmother's, Sarah and Rebecca, the freed and the future. Sarah, my mother's name. Rebecca, my name. I sat in that basement for a long time, surrounded by photographs of strangers who were my family, trying to understand what I was looking at, trying to accept what the images were telling me. The Whitmore family had a tradition, a responsibility. Every generation, one person stayed, one person kept watch, and in exchange, the others could leave, could build lives elsewhere, could forget. The annex was where the watcher lived. And my grandmother had been the watcher from 1959 to 1961. 2 years, just 2 years. Not the 40 or 60 years that others seemed to have served. Not the eternal childhood that Margaret had been locked into. She'd left. She'd gone to Houston. She'd married, become Clara Sullivan, raised my mother, then raised me. She'd been freed, and now I understood why. She'd been freed because she'd provided a replacement. But there was a photograph missing from the sequence. I could see it in the gaps, in the way the dates didn't quite line up. Someone should have been the watcher from 1961 to now. Someone should have been standing near that annex for the past 63 years. Unless they were inside it. I went back upstairs, carrying the photograph of my mother and myself. I looked at it in better light, examining every detail. My mother was young in this photo, maybe 25. I was a toddler, maybe 2 years old. We were both smiling, both looked happy. But in the background, barely visible in the shadow of the house, there was a figure. I had to squint to see it, had to hold the photograph at just the right angle to catch it in the light. A small figure, child-sized, standing in the doorway of the house, watching. I went to the walkway door. It was open again, though I'd closed it. The annex door was still shut, but as I stood there, I heard something I hadn't heard before. Singing. Soft. Faint. A child's voice. Singing something repetitive and wordless. The kind of nonsense song children make up when they're alone and trying to comfort themselves. I stepped onto the walkway and walked toward the annex. The singing continued, not getting louder, just becoming clearer, more distinct, and I recognized it. It was a song I used to sing when I was 7 or 8. A song I'd made up, just random words and melody. Something I'd sung to myself when my grandmother was working late and I was alone in the apartment. I'd forgotten that song, hadn't thought about it in 20 years. But the annex remembered. The annex was singing it back to me. I stood in front of the door, listening to my own voice coming from inside. Not my adult voice, but my child's voice, exactly as it had sounded 2 decades ago. And I understood. My mother hadn't disappeared. My grandmother hadn't been freed by random chance. My mother had taken her place in the annex, had become the watcher, had stayed here from 1987 until when I reached out and touched the door handle. It was warm, not hot, just warm, like skin. If you're still listening, you're already part of this house. I should have run. Any rational person would have run. But instead, I went to the study and searched through my grandmother's papers more thoroughly, looking for anything about my mother, anything about what had actually happened in 1987. I found it in a safety deposit box key taped to the bottom of the desk drawer. The key had a tag, Jefferson Bank and Trust, Box 147. I drove to town. The bank was a small brick building on Main Street, the kind of place where everyone knows everyone else's business. The manager, a man in his 60s with kind eyes and reading glasses on a chain, checked my identification and my proof of inheritance and led me to the vault. Box 147 was small, narrow. Inside was a single envelope, yellowed slightly at the edges. I took it to one of the private rooms they provide for customers, sat down at the small table, opened it with hands that wouldn't stop shaking. Inside were 2 documents. The first was a birth certificate, mine, but it showed something I'd never known, something that rewrote my entire understanding of my origin. Under a place of birth, it didn't say Houston Methodist Hospital or any hospital at all. It said Jefferson, Texas, this house's address on Route 134. I'd been born here, in this house, not in Houston, not in a hospital, here. The second document was a letter, handwritten on pale blue stationery, the kind women used to use for correspondence. The ink had faded slightly but was still legible, dated June 1987. It was from my mother to my grandmother. Mama, I understand now. I understand what you did, and why you did it, and I forgive you. How could I not? You gave me life, and then you gave me freedom. 25 years of freedom. That's more than most Whitmore women get. That's more than Margaret got. That's more than any of them got. Stretching back to when this house was built, and this agreement was made. But I can't do what you did. I can't offer her up. I can't pretend I don't know what the house wants, what it's always wanted. I can't leave her here and walk away the way you left me in that apartment in Houston when I was 2 years old, the way you walked out that door and never looked back. I remember, Mama, not consciously. I was too young for that. But the house made sure I would remember in my bones, in my blood, in the dreams I couldn't explain. So I'm making a different choice. I'm staying. I'm taking your place. I'm walking into that annex voluntarily, consciously, with full knowledge of what it means. And you're going to raise her away from here, in Houston, in the world, where she can have a real life, where she can go to school and make friends and fall in love and do all the things that Whitmore women aren't supposed to be able to do. Don't tell her about me. Don't tell her about this place. Don't tell her what runs in her blood, what's written in her inheritance, what waits for her here. Let her think I disappeared. Let her think I was weak, irresponsible, selfish. Whatever story you need to tell to make it bearable for both of you. Let her blame me instead of you. I'd rather she hate me for abandoning her than know the truth. I'd rather she think I was a coward than know I was a sacrifice. The annex is already calling me. I can feel it the way you must have felt it. The way Margaret felt it when she was 8 years old and walked through that door for the first time. It's not painful exactly. It's more like gravity, like the whole world is tilting toward that door, and standing still requires more strength than I have. I went inside this morning. The door opened for me. You said it would, when I was ready. And I saw Margaret. She's still here. Mama. She's still 8 years old. Still in that white dress. Still waiting. Still keeping her promise. Still keeping us all free. She smiled at me. She took my hand with fingers that were warm and real and she said, "You'll like it here. Time doesn't hurt in here. I don't know what that means yet, but I will. I'm going to join her now. I'm going to walk through that door and take my place so you can leave with Rebecca. So Rebecca can leave when the time comes. So she never has to know what it feels like to be owned by architecture, by agreements made before you were born, by promises kept by women who had no choice. Tell her I loved her, when she's old enough to understand. If you think she can bear it, tell her I made a choice. Tell her it was mine to make. Tell her I wasn't afraid. I'm lying about that last part. I am afraid. But fear doesn't change what needs to be done. Take care of her. Give her the life I won't have. And when you die, when she inherits this place, maybe she'll be strong enough to break what we couldn't break. Maybe she'll be the last. Maybe the house will finally be satisfied. Or maybe it never will be. Sarah, I read the letter 4 times, 5 times. My hands were shaking so badly the paper rattled against the table. I had to set it down. smooth it out with trembling fingers, make myself breathe. My mother had been 25 years old when she wrote this. The same age I'd been when I'd thought I understood sacrifice because I'd taken a lower-paying job to care for my grandmother in her final years. I'd thought I understood love. I'd thought I understood responsibility. I'd understood nothing. My mother hadn't disappeared. She'd sacrificed herself. She'd walked into that annex in 1987, when I was 2 years old, and she'd never walked back out. But that was 39 years ago. 39 years of being in that room. 39 years with Margaret, who'd been there since 1897. 39 years of whatever the house did to the people it kept. I drove back to the property. The sun was setting, turning the pine trees black against an orange sky. The annex looked different in this light, sharper, more defined, as if the fading day was making it more real instead of less. I went to the walkway door. It was open. I didn't remember opening it. I didn't remember even touching it when I'd left. I walked across those weathered planks to the green door. This time, when I touched the handle, it turned. The door opened. The interior was exactly as I'd glimpsed it before. A single room, maybe 20 feet square. There were no windows on the back or side walls. I'd been right about that. But the space wasn't dark. Light came from somewhere I couldn't identify. A soft, ambient glow that had no visible source. Not electric, not candles, just light, existing independent of any origin I could see. The room was furnished simply. A narrow bed against one wall, covered with a white quilt that looked hand-stitched. A small table near the bed, wooden and plain. A single chair. On the table was a photograph in a silver frame that had tarnished to black at the edges. I recognized the people in it immediately, even though I'd never seen this particular image before. My grandmother, young and smiling, actually smiling, something I'd rarely seen in the photos I'd grown up with. And next to her, a girl who looked exactly like me at age 7 or 8. Same dark hair, same serious eyes, same expression I'd seen in mirrors my whole life. But it wasn't me. I'd never been to this house as a child. I'd never stood next to my grandmother in a garden like the one in this photograph. I picked up the frame, looking closer. The girl was wearing a dress I'd never seen, a white dress with lace at the collar, standing in a garden that didn't exist on this property anymore. I could see rose bushes in the background, a stone bench, a sundial. My grandmother had her arm around the girl's shoulders, and both of them were looking at the camera with an expression I couldn't quite read. Not happiness, not sadness, something else. Acceptance, maybe, or resignation, or the expression of people who know a secret so heavy they can never speak it aloud. I set the frame down and looked around the room more carefully. There were no other photographs on the table, no clothes in the small wardrobe standing in the corner, no personal items except that single image and a hairbrush lying on the bed beside the pillow. But on the bed, there were indentations, 2 of them, 2 places where bodies had lain, pressed the mattress down, left their shapes in the quilted fabric, as if someone had been lying there recently, as if 2 people had just gotten up. I reached out to touch one of the indentations, and that's when I heard the voice. Not a sound, exactly, not something my ears heard, more like a memory of sound, the way you might recall a song you heard long ago, or the way a phrase you read can echo in your mind with a voice that isn't quite yours and isn't quite anyone else's. A child's voice, singing something soft and repetitive, the kind of nonsense song children make up when they're alone. The song I used to sing. I turned around, but the room was empty. No one there. Just me and the furniture and that sourceless light. The singing continued, and I realized it wasn't coming from any direction. It was coming from the house itself, from the walls, from the air, from everywhere and nowhere. I backed toward the door, and that's when I saw the writing. It was carved into the wooden floorboards near the bed. Letters so small I'd missed them at first. I had to kneel down and turn my head to read them. She stays here so I can leave. The handwriting looked like mine. My handwriting from childhood, before I'd learned cursive, when I still printed everything in careful block letters. But I'd never carved anything into these floorboards. I'd never been in this room before today. I stood up quickly and ran. I didn't think about it. Didn't try to be rational or brave. I just ran. Back across the walkway, through the main house, out the front door, and stood in the driveway, breathing hard, my heart hammering against my ribs. I needed to leave. I needed to get in my car and drive away and never come back. I walked to my car and tried the door. Locked. But I hadn't locked it. I never locked it when I was at the house. There was no one around for miles. I tried the other doors, all locked, from the inside, as if someone had been sitting in the car and pressed all the lock buttons down before vanishing. I ran to the road, made it maybe 50 yards before I felt it. Not pain, not force, just resistance, as if the air itself was thickening, becoming solid, pushing back against me with every step, like walking through water that got denser the farther I went. I pushed harder. The resistance increased. By the time I was 100 yards from the house, I was moving through something that felt like wet cement, my muscles screaming, my lungs burning, every step forward requiring more strength than I had. I stopped, turned around. The house sat there, patient and still, waiting for me to understand what it had already decided. When I walked back toward it, the resistance faded. With every step closer, the air thinned, until by the time I reached the driveway, I could move normally again. The house had made its decision. I went inside, sat on the sofa in the parlor, tried to think of a way out, a loophole, an escape. There had to be a way out. Contracts could be broken. Traditions could be ended. I just needed to figure out how. I spent the next 3 hours searching the house for anything that might explain the mechanism, the rules, the way the pact worked. I read through every paper in the study, every letter, every scrap of documentation, and I found it, in the very back of the bottom drawer, underneath everything else. A single sheet of paper, yellowed and brittle, written in formal script that looked like it was from the 1890s. The ink had faded to brown, but was still legible. It was a contract, literally. A legal document, signed and witnessed. Agreement between the Whitmore family and the House of Route 134. Whereas the house requires a guardian to maintain its consciousness and preserve its memory, and whereas the Whitmore family requires the freedom to live beyond these walls and build lives in the wider world, it is hereby agreed that one member of the Whitmore family, of sound mind and willing heart, shall serve as guardian for a period of time determined by the house, until such time as a replacement guardian is offered and accepted. In exchange for this service, all other members of the Whitmore family shall be freed from obligation and permitted to live their lives without interference, to marry, to have children, to pursue happiness as they see fit. This agreement is binding in perpetuity, to be renewed with each generation, until such time as the house is satisfied or the Whitmore line ceases to exist. Signed this day, October 13th, 1893, William Whitmore, Martha Whitmore. The house had signed. There was a signature line at the bottom, and it had been filled in, not with handwriting, with something else, a mark that looked organic, like a fingerprint made by something without fingers, or a burn mark, or a stain that had seeped into the paper from the other side. I set the document down carefully, my hands numb. My grandmother had known about this contract. My mother had known about this contract. They'd both understood what it meant, what it would cost, and they'd both made the same calculation. Their freedom was worth more than mine. No, that wasn't fair. My mother had tried to save me. She'd offered herself instead. She'd walked into that annex voluntarily to buy me time, to buy me a life, but the house had been patient. It had waited for me to turn 30, to inherit the property, to come here of my own free will, and I walked back to the annex. The door was still open, had been open since I'd touched it that first time, inviting, patient. I stood in the doorway and looked at the 2 indentations on the bed, the photograph on the table. They were waiting for me. I tried the front door of the main house one more time. Locked. I tried the windows. Sealed. I tried the back door, the basement entrance, every possible exit. Nothing would open. The house had closed itself around me. I went back to the annex, sat down on the bed, felt the indentations adjust to accommodate a third person, the mattress reshaping itself around my weight. The photograph on the table had changed. Now there were 3 images in 3 separate frames I didn't remember seeing before. One showed my grandmother and a young girl who looked like Margaret. One showed my mother and Margaret together, both smiling. The third showed all of us, my grandmother, my mother, me, and Margaret. 4 generations, 4 guardians, 4 women who'd made choices or had choices made for them. Except my grandmother had left. She'd earned her freedom. She'd earned it by offering me. I lay down on the bed. The mattress was soft, comfortable, the kind of bed you could sleep in forever. The quilt smelled like lavender, like my grandmother's apartment, like every safe place I'd ever known. I closed my eyes and heard the singing start. My mother's voice and Margaret's voice, blending together, singing that nonsense song I'd made up when I was 7, welcoming me home. When I opened my eyes, they were there, standing at the foot of the bed. My mother looked exactly as she had in the photograph from 1987, 25 years old, beautiful, sad, unchanged by the 39 years she'd spent in this room. Margaret looked exactly as she had in 1897. 8 years old, serious, patient, preserved like a photograph that never ages. "I'm sorry," my mother said. Her voice was soft, distant, as if coming from very far away, even though she was standing right there. "I tried to save you. I gave myself instead. But the house always collects what it's owed." "How long?" I asked. My voice sounded strange in this room, echoless and flat. She smiled, and there was something wrong with the smile, something that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Time doesn't work the same way here. It's been 39 years. It's been an afternoon. It's been forever. Eventually you stop counting." Margaret reached out and took my hand. Her fingers were warm, real, small and delicate like a child's should be. "You're the last one," she said. "The Whitmore line ends with you. No children, no next generation. When you're done, the house will finally be complete." "Complete?" I said. "Full," my mother said. "The house needs consciousness to exist, to remember, to be. It takes it from us, little by little, year by year, until we become part of it. Part of the walls, the floors, the foundation. Margaret's been here the longest. She's almost completely absorbed. I'm next. And then you. And then the house will be truly alive," Margaret said. And there was something eager in her voice, something that hadn't been there before. Not just conscious, not just aware, alive. That's what it's been working towards since the beginning. That's what the Whitmore family agreed to. 130 years of feeding it guardians, one generation at a time, until it has enough consciousness, enough memory, enough soul to become something new. I tried to get up, couldn't. My body wouldn't respond. I could feel the bed beneath me, soft and warm, and I could feel it starting to change, starting to grow into me, or me into it. I couldn't tell which. "Don't fight," my mother said. "It only makes it harder." I fought at first. It took months before I could accept it. Margaret stopped fighting decades ago. "You tricked me," I said. She shook her head, and I saw tears in her eyes. Real tears. Human tears. "The house tricked you. The house tricked all of us. I tried to save you. I gave it myself instead. But it was always going to take you eventually. You're the last Whitmore, the last piece it needs. But you knew," I said. "You both knew, and you didn't warn me. You let me come here. You had to come here," Margaret said, and her voice was changing now, becoming less childlike, more ancient. "You inherited the property. The contract required it. You had to accept the inheritance. That's how it works. Free will. You had to choose, even if you didn't know you were choosing." The bed was definitely changing now. I could feel it spreading, growing, extending tendrils that wrapped around my arms, my legs, my chest. Not painful, not violent, just inevitable, like sinking into water, like being absorbed. "How long?" I asked again. "How long until I'm done?" "Until you're part of the house," my mother said. "Until there's no difference between you and these walls." For Margaret, it took 30 years before she stopped being Margaret and started being the house. For me, I don't know yet. I can still feel myself, mostly. And then the house will be complete," they said together, in perfect unison. And I realized their voices sounded the same now, identical, as if they were becoming the same person, the same consciousness, the same thing. "And what will it do?" I asked. "When it's complete, when it's alive?" They both smiled, the same smile. The smile of people who know a secret so vast they can never tell it, or the smile of something that isn't quite people anymore. "Remember," they said together, "the house will remember everything, everyone, every life it's taken, every sacrifice, every choice, every moment, forever." And then they were gone, faded, dissolved, or maybe they'd never been there at all. Maybe they were already part of the walls, part of the air, part of the house speaking to me in voices I recognized because the house had learned to use them. I was alone with the house, which was singing now in voices I knew. My mother's voice, Margaret's voice, my grandmother's voice, the voices of all the Whitmore women who'd come before, all blended together into a sound that wasn't quite music and wasn't quite speech. It was memory made audible. It was consciousness made manifest. It was the house, learning how to be alive, and I was becoming part of it. They found my car 9 months later, abandoned on Route 134 with the keys still in the ignition and my phone on the passenger seat. The county took possession of the property after the required waiting period. 2 years of searching, of posting notices, of trying to locate next of kin who didn't exist. They sent an assessor to evaluate the house for auction. A man named Daniels, middle-aged, professional, thorough. He spent 3 hours there, measuring rooms, checking utilities, photographing everything. According to his report, the house was in excellent condition, well-maintained, ready for immediate occupancy. He noted the beautiful original features, the solid construction, the peaceful location, perfect for a family looking for rural privacy. He made no mention of an annex. His photographs showed only the main house, the garage, the surrounding pines. The covered walkway appeared in one shot, but it led nowhere, just ended at a blank space where a building should have been, where a building had been. The house was sold at auction to a family from Dallas, a couple in their 40s with a daughter, 10 years old. They moved in on a Tuesday in September, excited about the space, the quiet, the chance to start fresh in a place with history. The daughter's name is Emily. She has dark hair and serious eyes. She looks like her mother, people say. But when I see her, and yes, I can see her now, I can see everything that happens in this house. I see something else. I see the Whitmore line, continued through some distant cousin, some forgotten branch of the family tree. The house sees it too. Sometimes, at night, Emily hears singing. She tells her parents it's coming from outside, from somewhere near the back of the house. They tell her it's just the wind in the pines, the old house settling, her imagination running wild the way children's imaginations do. She doesn't argue. She's learning to be still, learning to listen. And the house is teaching her, the way it taught my grandmother, the way it taught my mother, the way it taught me. Because the contract didn't end with me. It never ends. Subscribe if you want to keep hearing stories about houses that hide what no one wanted to face. The annex that wasn't there was exactly where it needed to be, waiting for the next Whitmore woman to come home.